Is this the part where I say, I told you so? It started with weird pronouns being born in gender studies classes that no one took seriously until laws popped up compelling people's speech. Suddenly we had bathroom bills as if society or even transsexuals ever had issues navigating basic human functions. What was once one or two underage transition stories in tiny liberal European countries became friend groups of teenage girls in every American city transitioning together. And then everyone had to look at men beating women's asses in sports, children undergoing chemical castration and sex change surgeries, men in women's prisons, nudity at the White House, senators who can't define what a woman is. Who would have ever thought that all that wouldn't work out? Is this the part where I say, I told you so? Because I'm feeling like it's the part where I say, I told you so. And I am not gonna hold your hand when I say this, because protecting people's feelings is actually how we got here. And by here, I mean specifically, I think it's safe to say that we are officially at the point where the trans acceptance tipping point has in fact been tipped. I think it's pretty apparent to anybody who knows how to check the cultural temperature in any meaningful way, which is actually not a very sharp ability of the trans community. I think it's pretty apparent that society has reached the point where it's just kind of a wrap for the trans lunacy that has taken over the 2010s until now. Trump has truly, in the first 2 weeks, met the cultural temperature's energy and taken aim at the trans excesses, the excesses that have come out of trans ideology and the movement over the past decade or so, and rightfully so.
It will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
But even more relevant than the legal backlash is definitely the cultural backlash that's occurring right now that I have been screaming about from the rooftops and warning about for the past decade, that if the trans community and the LGBT community in general didn't shape up and act right, was going to happen. And now the day has come. And now some of y'all want to be mad at me, as if I wasn't trying to avoid that the entire time. Because see, I'm actually at the place where a lot of people in society are, which is the understanding that backlash against the community right now, of course, never anything violent or unconstitutional, but the cultural attitudes toward the community right now is 100% deserved. It's been a long road to get here. Who would have ever thought that all that wouldn't work out? I guess me, right? I've been saying this for over a decade, but this video isn't about me. This video is for anybody who's still confused about how we got here. This is how the trans community sabotaged their own movement. So Joe Rogan is known for his MMA fighting, being in good shape, and just overall being in amazing health at the age of 56, 57. And one of the supplements that he's talked about taking for that amazing health is NMN. And rather than me try to explain it, I'm gonna let the doctor who discovered it explain it.
I also take supplements, and in fact most of my colleagues are in the field of aging, or anti-aging as people call it. So I take NMN every morning.
What is NMN?
Good question. So let me take a quick step back.
Sure.
So about 20 years ago, Lenny Guarente and a team of us at MIT discovered a set of genes that controls aging. And what they do is they protect all organisms on the planet, plants, bacteria, humans, from deterioration and disease. They're like the Pentagon. They sense when we're hungry, sense when we're exercising, and they send out the troops to defend us. And so we think that these genes are responsible for the effects of dieting and exercise, which is great. What that means is we can now mimic that with molecules.
I feel like I should make a shopping list.
So it depends.
So with NMN, you get improved energy, weight management, endurance and strength, and anti-aging benefits. That one's my favorite. Here is the supplement right here. NMN is going to be the one that kicks off it's called NAD+. And you take this, your body starts producing NAD+, and it starts firing up all those abilities that you used to have when you were 16, 17, 18. It's just amazing. Fountain of youth stuff. You can look at it as something that actually undoes aging. Go check out our amazing sponsor at Black Forest today. Supporting them also supports my channel. Links are down below, and I think you're going to be pleasantly, amazingly surprised. I know I was.
Being a non-binary person that sometimes has the choice to either go into a men's restroom looking like this. So you can look at me looking like this.
It's just interesting. I thought this was a trans debate. That's what I thought.
Even.
The rise of hate and violence facing the 2S LGBTQI+ communities.
I don't identify as a man or a woman. I'm neither. I am both. I am beyond.
Gender is a universe. It is a broad spectrum of planets and stars.
Like, you're not trans. Like, there's a medical definition of being a transsexual. First, it's extremely important to understand that it wasn't always this way. The trans community was radically different even just a decade ago when I started my transition in 2015. Now, to set the stage, 2015, gay marriage had just been legalized. There was a complete societal consensus of, at worst, indifference and at best, complete support of gay people and gay marriage. You couldn't find two people to sit in a room and even debate this topic anymore. No one cared. And most people were overjoyed that it even happened. And trans people, being the T in LGBT, enjoyed pretty much all of the blanket support that the rest of the community was getting.
You heard it. Donald Trump has just revealed to Showbiz Tonight, and he now is letting transgender beauty queen Jenna Talikova compete in his Miss Universe pageant.
Can transgender women compete in Miss Universe?
Yes, it was obvious to us that she was entitled to compete.
I feel great about it.
And at this time, I chose super naively to go to a trans support group because I felt like, if I'm starting this is a new thing for me. I want to maybe seek advice or like camaraderie with people going through the same thing. And what I found was myself at a round table in a transgender support group with about 15 to 20 other people, all of them identifying as some form of non-binary, gender fluid, or some other all of them had they, them pronouns. They were using all this language that did not match any of the language my doctor was using, did not match any of the language my research was showing.
Today's pronoun of the day is stars.
Him, her, them.
I am genderqueer, trans, masc, and queer.
Let's talk about my pronouns. So I use...
Let's not. Moving on. I realized something different was happening. There was a politicization and a takeover happening of what used to be treated as a medical condition. And that's what a lot of people just don't understand to this day in 2025. A lot of people have the misconception that trans people really started existing and were born out of postmodern liberalism, when in reality, it's just another tiny group of people, a minority, that was swooped up by liberals and the woke mind virus, politicized to hell, and destroyed. Comparing Google search trends for the word transsexual or even transgender to words like non-binary, misgendering, gender fluid, etc. is the best way to see this exact moment when the takeover happened. You can literally see how these concepts were never searched of or talked about prior to 2015.
So I identify as non-binary and trans. I don't identify as a man or a woman. I'm neither, I'm both, I'm beyond.
I completely reject how non-binary people specifically have injected themselves into the trans label. I am a transsexual. There's a medical basis for that. There's a scientific basis for that. And for non-binary, it's really not the case. I think that non-binary is more of a political term than anything else. If it comes down to conversations about trans people, I just wish actual transsexuals were having them, and oftentimes it's activists who are non-binary.
There is so much variance. You are not a trans woman of color. You are not a poor trans woman. You have different experiences as a trans person that we need to talk about. We cannot parse out at the exact same time to have this conversation.
Yeah, everything's nuanced, but at the end of the day, there's a very fine line between someone who's a transsexual.
You don't know my life. You don't know my experience with the gender dysphoria.
We don't know each other's life. I'm not saying that. I think you're the one that said that I was erasing you as trans. I am. Like, you're not trans. Like, there's a medical definition of being a transsexual.
I'm gonna stop you. Jamie, how are you doing?
I'm okay.
You're okay?
Yeah.
Do you feel like talking? You don't have to. Okay.
When the pronoun shit started happening, I remember people being pretty much universally dismissive that it would ever lead to any actual like societal problems or any issues. You could mostly just avoid anybody going by they, them, or any weird pronouns. And it was mostly on college campuses, and it mostly didn't matter. Until, of course, Bill C-16 in Canada came out, and suddenly there was an attempt to legislate people's speech.
Bill C-16, which, by the way, the Senate just passed, right? Half the conservatives voted for it, despite the fact that the Justice Minister was presented with an amendment that clearly indicated that Bill C-16 would not infringe upon free speech and refused to consider the amendment. So that's where we are. There's compelled speech.
And pretty soon, the mainstream cultural expectation was that everyone had to respect everyone's pronouns, no matter how stupid they were, no matter how nonsensical they were at all times. And it was basically treated like you were saying the N-word or some shit if you did not, which is insane.
My pronouns aren't preferred. They are mandatory.
And what I still see so many libs truly not understanding is that this was actually an infringement on people's lives. For the first time, the topic was touching them in a very real way. Suddenly, you could get fired at work for not respecting people's pronouns. We never had any official, laws in the states like that as they did in Canada. However, I know multiple people who were fired for not respecting people's pronouns, no matter how stupid they were. It's a story I hear in emails and messages all of the time. So this is what the culture became. And it was all because of this tiny fringe group of just like complete freaks. And I don't even mean like trans equals freak. What I mean is like the activists were undeniably freaks.
Gender is a universe. It is a broad spectrum of planets and stars and sky that truly cannot be contained.
And trust me, I'm not even trying to cover for like trans activists being different from just trans people, because they are, but by and large still, regular trans people just let it happen. The community pretty much had a consensus that these activists were, moving things in the right way and pushing people forward. And in reality, all it was doing was pissing people off and making trans people who previously were not even thinking this way into extremists themselves. And that's what these dumbasses don't understand, is that pronouns are utilitarian words. People say he and she based on a subconscious assessment of the person they're interacting with's secondary sex characteristics. There's actually not much any thought put into it. But suddenly, we all had to think about it all the time. And then suddenly you had a generation of people caught up in this ideological movement, this political movement of gender fluidity, non-binary, holding up their phones, having public freakouts all over social media.
Disgusting. I just went through the Taco Bell drive-thru. And do you know how they greeted me? They said, "Hello, ma'am." And then after handing me my food, said, "Thank you, ma'am. Have a good day." Bitch, what about me says ma'am?
Tell me why I just got misgendered at the pharmacy getting my testosterone needles.
I went into the bank. The girl who was doing it had a question, and she calls her coworker over like, well, he's trying to change his name on his account. And I'm like, she?
Absolutely losing their minds that people didn't know what to call them when they were visually obscuring what their gender even was. Or expecting someone to say something that looked completely opposite to what they were presenting as. The GameStop trans person is a very good example of that.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am. Motherfucker, take it outside. If you want to call me sir again, I will show you a fucking sir. I apologize. Motherfucker. I apologize now.
People are tired of playing the game. I've been tired of playing the game. I never played the game. But people have a limit. You can only push people so far and treat people like they are these pariahs, these unemployable, like scum of the earth because they accidentally misgendered their fat blue-haired coworker who goes by Caesar.
Hi, kids. Hey, kids.
She is the world's youngest transsexual.
A child born in the wrong body.
I want to talk to the kids.
They mess with the kids. And how you do that, expecting to retain anybody's respect, is nuts. I need anybody confused as to how this all happened, that society has turned on trans people, to understand that any movement that even optically places itself as a threat to women or children is destined to fail, is destined to die, and honestly deserves to. It used to be 1 or 2 instances of underage trans people in small liberal countries halfway across the planet.
Kim Petras, who is probably the youngest person in the world to have a sex change. But how easy was it to make that life-changing decision at such a young age?
And then all of a sudden, you had sex changes for minors in all 50 states. And I cannot stress enough that this is not how the issue was handled, even at the start of my transition as early as 2015. It was simply not a thing. I feel like most people now completely conflate the concept of trans and transition with kids. That's how much kids has become synonymous with the trans topic. I think there's people that don't even really think about adults transitioning because they don't have an issue with what adults do with their bodies. That's most people. And just how society was forced to universally get behind insane pronoun usage, suddenly everyone had to be okay with sex changes for minors, with hormone therapy, with castration, chemical and otherwise, on underage people, as if it was something that even had any long-term studies as to being something positive for the kids. People had to suddenly suspend their basic human knowledge that you shouldn't sterilize a child while they're a child and just be on board with it. Otherwise, you were treated as the same kind of pariah that would be pro-segregation in the South in the 60s. It's just the hysterics that made everybody who had any issues or even questions on this topic out to be the most bigoted people on the planet. And again, people just got sick of it. And it wasn't even just enough that everyone had this new cultural pressure to be okay with something that is so obviously wrong that, again, I've been ringing the alarm about since the very start of my channel, suddenly there was all this propaganda around it. Suddenly you were seeing trans cartoons, trans kids characters.
T stands for trans or transgender.
Ooh, that's a cool new word.
Definitely, Teddy.
These papas are non-binary, they love each other so proudly. Trans members of this family all love each other so proudly.
An entire attempt at normalizing this, not among just adults, but children. Again, something completely new. Even as waves of detransitioners were going on the internet telling their stories about how they felt like their lives were ruined or their bodies were destroyed from these procedures as minors, it didn't matter how many people came forward talking about that. There was a complete suppression of that. There was a complete suppression of anybody who wanted to amplify those stories. And then it got to the point where it wasn't just the kids on the operating table that were being messed with. It was every kid in every public school in every state. Queer theory, gender ideology was suddenly being taught in all of these schools.
As a queer teacher, but also for my students, many of whom are queer or LGBT, identified as LGBT.
I teach high school, and most days of the week I come to school in stilettos. And the reason why is so I can create an explicitly queer space for all of my students.
This public school teacher made her students pledge allegiance to the pride flag.
My room does not have a flag. It used to be there, but I took it down during COVID because it made me uncomfortable. We do have a flag in the class that you can pledge your allegiance to.
You'd walk into American public schools and see a gay flag before you'd see an American flag. And one thing about that, if you ever thought that the trans activism, the trans movement was going to survive through corrupting schools like that, you just didn't see the writing on the wall. This really upset parents, and it upset everyone, even that weren't parents, but understood that this was something strange. This was something wrong. This was clearly indoctrination. It wasn't just teaching tolerance and acceptance. When you're asking every student what their pronouns are, when you're introducing every student to all of the 1,000 genders you've invented, to all of the 1,000 pronouns and ways to identify, and you're making it fun and colorful and like it's a little quiz, you are trying to actively make kids gay or trans. Not to mention the flooding of explicit books being put in public schools, some of them depicting sex acts or talking about gay sex acts that suddenly were in the libraries for all students to pick up and read. A book called This Book is Gay. What an amazing cover. You ban it and it has the word gay in it. In my caveman brain, that means you do not like gay people. Right, because you're a simpleton. The reality is the book has a glossary that teaches kids about kinks, such as on someone, eating fecal matter. I wasn't even ready to say that out loud, and kids are ready to read that. Like, I was not even prepared to read that out loud. And how to use Grindr, an app that is 18 and over, by the way. So why someone in middle school would need to know how to use Grindr? I mean, wow. Genderqueer, next book. Another popular one that's being banned across the country. Literally shows artwork of gay oral, as well as full intercourse, how to wear binders. I like how full intercourse is like the most tame thing that I've read so far out of all the things. It's like, wow. Adult toys. Keyword adults. You got a book in kids' libraries talking about adult toys. The next book, Let's Talk About It, is the name. Artwork of full gay male intercourse, and then sometimes even being actively taught by the teachers in the school. And then, as with all these other topics, it was completely denied by leftists. Everyone said it wasn't happening. Ron DeSantis was the first one to try to stamp it out and actually try to ban these explicit books from schools. And then, of course, the hysterics. They tried to turn it into him and people who supported getting rid of explicit books in children's libraries into some sort of like archaic medieval book burners. Like, this is not the Library of Alexandria, bitch. It's public schools, and parents have a right to not want their kids subjected to sometimes pornographic imagery in the books.
The first openly transgender athlete to win an NCAA Division I title.
As a transgender fighter, it's hiding the fact that they were biologically male, beating the out of these women.
Do you think it's fair for you to compete in the women's category?
Absolutely.
I lost to a biological male.
Why?
Why not?
Similar to, like I said, that if a movement positions itself even just optically as a threat to children, that it's a wrap, it's doomed, it's gonna fail. It's the same as when you mess with women. And the concept of trans women in women's sports was again something that was just not around when I first started. I mean, it's comical, it's clownery. When you look at any video of it happening, when you look at these athletes.
There's a large group of people that no matter what I do in a sport will always automatically assume that I have an advantage.
So this question of, do trans women have an advantage over cis women? We don't know.
Trans people don't transition for athletics. We transition to be happy and authentic and our true selves. Transitioning to get an advantage is not something that ever factors into our decisions.
This was probably the easiest thing to debunk as being fair or normal or something that people should accept, right? Just the basic biological differences between males and females. You can just run the list, the long list of reasons, and yet you were forced to accept this. You were forced to accept this all the way from middle schools and high schools that suddenly had trans kids on just the local sports team to universities to actual professional sports. And when I think of the topic of trans women and women's sports and how that really turned society off, go figure, it's hard not to think of Fallon Fox, who literally cracked a woman's skull.
Those end reversals by both fighters.
These girls are getting right into it. Fox to the knees, and that's it. Fallon Fox.
Another, of course, honorary mention is Leah Thomas, which is definitely gonna go. Y'all want to act like Blaire White is the reason why anything bad is happening to trans people. Take that up with Leah Thomas's big ass, please. Please. If you have more words for Blaire White for voting in a way that you don't like, I'm gonna need some words spared for Leah Thomas, who set back trans acceptance easily 10 years, which was the cherry on top of the fact that it was already sliding back. Something that, again, ad nauseum, I was saying in every video and never taken seriously and crapped on by the entire community. Does it seem like I'm holding a grudge? Because I am. Just a bit, but I'm working on it. So at this point, you literally have this movement that has injected itself into nearly every facet of people's lives. It just keeps creeping into people's lives. Not to mention, suddenly people were talking about participation in sports as if it was some sort of human right.
You've competed at some of the highest levels in sports. And you know, as your hoodie says, sport is a human right. That is what you believe in. Talk me through.
As if being on a sports team of your choosing is a right, is a human right, and to violate that is a violation of some sort of sacred, because that's really the problem, right? They turned all these things I see nonstop people talking about now, copying and pasting trans rights or human rights 17 times in a tweet, as if screaming it incessantly like a schizophrenic makes it more believable and or true or wins anyone over, number one. But number two, as if the things they're talking about are even human rights, as if sterilizing children is a human right, as if dominating sports is a human right, as if going into a change room, whichever one you feel like, is a human right.
Adam Graham was a predator who abused vulnerable women. This is the same person, a transition made after they were arrested. They were initially sent to Scotland's only all-female jail.
2 female inmates at a supposedly all-women's prison have just become pregnant. You wonder how that happened.
I worked behind the scenes so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to surgery.
And if you were wondering if there were any other corners of society that this ideology could try to reconstruct, change, and or infiltrate, you probably weren't surprised when it got down to prisons, when it got down to males in women's prisons, sometimes men that were convicted of serious crimes against women.
Adam Graham was a predator who abused vulnerable women, a double rapist who attacked victims in their own homes. And this is the same person, now known as Isla Bryson, a transition made after they were arrested, when they were initially sent to Scotland's only all-female jail.
We're suddenly being placed in women's prisons, all in the name of compassion, which is about the most sadistic thing you could do. And I know society doesn't really have room for compassion for men or women that are locked up for whatever crimes they are, usually justifiably locked up for. However, the idea that any woman deserves the punishment of being placed with an abuser a man who maybe has previously harmed women in a jail cell, all because that man, who may or may not still have a 7-inch dick, is supposed to be there based on protecting his feelings, is absolutely insane. And it's another thing you couldn't find any common ground with the activists on. This, no one was willing to admit that this goes a bit too far. It was all about prioritizing the safety of the trans woman and women be gone. And that is just, who could have ever thought this movement could sustain itself going forward if that's the case?
I dare you to try and stop me from going into a women's bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make.
A trans person is not going to attack you in the bathroom.
Forcing women to share private spaces with men is not dignity and not respect.
I took a picture of him and I asked him, why are you there? You're a man with a penis. Why are you in the women's locker room?
Bathrooms. If you were to listen to the trans activists, you would think that it wasn't until 2015, 2016 that society even knew how to engage in public restrooms politely and how to just do their business and go in a way that wasn't problematic. And here I was watching the first bathroom bills be signed into law saying, whoever had an issue with a bathroom? Even transsexuals. I'm looking around at no issues ever. And suddenly you had liberals still caking off the money from the gay rights era, from all the money they raised for gay marriage, didn't know what to do with it, had to go try to solve a legal problem that didn't even exist. And what does that do? It pisses people off. And of course, because the political takeover of trans, the woke mind virus that came in and dictated that trans can mean anything and you don't have to transition, you can just be a fully grown, very scary man, right? Suddenly you had issues like the infamous Planet Fitness debacle. This is a $400 million photo. That's how much Planet Fitness lost in just 4 days, and here's why. An elderly woman who was a customer of Planet Fitness went into the women's locker room, saw a little girl wrapped in a towel and appeared to be afraid. She then saw a man shaving his face in the sink. Planet Fitness actually sided with the man after he said that he identifies as a woman and didn't have to leave. And customers are upset. They're canceling their memberships, as they should. And as a trans woman myself, I just have to say, is the trans woman in the room with us right now? Because I'm not seeing trans wear. That's an entire man. And in my opinion, the women's locker room is off limits for even trans women that transition. So the argument for this whole man to be there is what? I'm just thinking, imagine this was my mom having to deal with this. One of my little cousins. Imagine your sister, your aunt, your niece. Women's safety comes before your feelings. You will live with having to shower at home. This is clearly just a man taking advantage of inclusivity policies, and Planet Fitness is really taking an L for defending this. I mean, it's reprehensible. Get out of the women's locker room. Suddenly you had angry, mentally ill activists on TikTok, which is another big catalyst, by the way, for the backlash against trans people. All these trans activists and insane people being swooped up by this movement, putting their phones up and talking, really revealed how much insanity was going on.
I dare you to try and stop me from going into a women's bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make. I dare you to try and stop a transgender woman in my presence from using the bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make.
I had a neighbor confront me for using the women's restroom. I lived here for 4.5 years. Everyone should know that I'm a trans woman. And I'm like, is there a problem? She's like, yeah, you're using the women's restroom. You're a man. And I said, I'm a trans woman. She's like, no, you're a man. And honestly, I just lost it. And just started screaming and swearing. I just couldn't handle it.
We have women's sports. Now we have bathrooms. Every area of life was being affected. And this is what people don't understand on the liberal side still. That you cannot erode all of society for this tiny fraction of people that, first of all, never even asked for your help. Because I'm of the opinion, maybe it's a bit controversial, that things were actually much better for trans people when nobody knew what the fuck they were. When people didn't really know the topic and there was never really any issues. I'm not saying that people have to hide in the shadows or be hermits if they're trans, but clearly reaching for the fire alarm every day didn't do them any favors either. So where do we go from here? People are probably not going to want to hear this, but I personally feel like the community deserves the cultural backlash happening. The community and its activists were acting as cultural poisons for at least a decade, and a healthy society is going to push back. It just is what it is. Short of any, like I said before, any violence, anything unconstitutional, anything that happens is actually going to be your fault. You're supposed to actually participate in society. There needs to be an emphasis on social integration, not social domination. And until you guys let go of that second one, it's never going to work out. You have to drop the trans kid issue. From now on, it needs to be 18 and older, yes. That's my personal opinion. I know a lot of people say it needs to be in their 20s or whatever. I personally feel like if you can die for your country at 18, you can do what you want as far as elective surgeries. But until the community stops fighting for kids to receive these treatments or stop letting the activists argue for this issue on their behalf, it's never going to be okay. No one's going backwards on that one. And y'all have a false paradigm that progress is just this thing that always goes forward and that the idea of trans kids is a progressive idea. It's in fact not. It's a regressive idea. It's a Nazi paperclip ass idea that is not going to fit anywhere in a modern society going forward. People aren't going back on that, so drop it. You got to drop the trans women and women's sports as well. Create trans leagues. It's very simple. It's another thing I've been screaming forever. It would not only give y'all an industry and give y'all the community you so desperately seek and talk about all the time, it would be an act of good faith to the wider public that y'all are willing to do things that actually respect women rather than trying to transgress on women's spaces and women's rights at every turn. So you're giving up the sports fight. It's over. You lost. You really lost on all these issues. And quite frankly, everyone wants me to speak on, Trump's moves in the first few weeks of his new administration and the things that he's done towards gender ideology and trans people. And again, I feel like they're deserved. And if you really want to nail them down one by one, what are the things that people are so upset about? I personally respect that he went on air saying that trans surgery for minors is not okay and that trans surgeries going forward are going to be performed very rarely.
There are only two genders, male and female, and we will have no men participating in women's sports, and transgender operations, which became the rage, will occur very rarely.
This is the correct take. It should be rare. It should not be treated as some blanket treatment for anybody and everybody that comes into one of these godforsaken gender clinics that have no standards of care. So y'all are lucky that that's even what he's saying. Second of all, removing X from people's passports. I don't know why y'all think that it's some sort of own on me, like, oh, look what he's doing now. Did you think I had an X on my passport? You bobblehead bitch. Did you think I had an X on my passport and I'm tripping that I can't be Aziz anymore? Because that's really not the case. There needs to be a complete recalibration of, I would say, the movement, but the movement just needs to die. If there's going to be any sort of path forward, there needs to be something new that's forged, that's actually common sense, that actually is for actual transsexuals. I know there's still people that really think that anything and everything a minority fights for or wants is supposed to be granted, and that we're supposed to have all this respect in the world for the politics of every minority group. Actually, no, it has to make sense. It cannot infringe on other people's rights. So on that note, you have to actually learn what a right is. Learn what a right is, because nothing, even now, that Trump has put in constitutes a right that was taken away from you. You can still work. You can still go to school. You can still eat at any restaurant you want. You don't have anything that would be considered a human right taken away from you. Maybe just take this as a moment where you can sort of figure out how to exist in society in a way that is not so utterly offensive all of the time, in a way that is not so antithetical towards how all of society lives. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to integrate into society, you just can't have an expectation that people will still treat you the same. So with that being said, that is my tough love for the day. It had to be said. It is what it is. I love you guys. Make sure you subscribe to this channel as well as my podcast channel. Follow me on X and Instagram, and I will see you in the next video.